The sun was shining brightly on a crisp spring morning as friends and family gathered at the grand outdoor venue for Sarah and Mark's wedding. The air buzzed with excitement, laughter filling every corner of the beautifully decorated space. White chairs were arranged neatly in rows, adorned with soft pink and gold ribbons that swayed gently in the breeze. A floral archway stood tall at the front, its vibrant blooms symbolizing love, hope, and new beginnings. Sarah looked radiant as she walked down the aisle, her gown flowing behind her like a dream. Her smile lit up the entire venue, and everyone couldn't help but feel the warmth of her happiness. Mark stood under the archway, his eyes fixed on her, unable to contain his grin. He had always been proud of their relationship, a union between two people from different backgrounds who had found love despite societal expectations. As Sarah reached him, they exchanged vows filled with promises of forever, sealing it with a kiss that left the crowd cheering. As the ceremony transitioned into the reception, the energy only grew stronger. Tables draped in elegant linen surrounded the dance floor, each centerpiece more stunning than the last. Guests mingled happily, enjoying the delicious food prepared by Mark's culinary team. It wasn't just any menu. It was a reflection of Mark's passion for cooking, featuring dishes inspired by flavors from around the world. People complimented the spread, saying it was one of the best meals they'd ever had. But amidst all the joy, there were subtle hints of tension lurking beneath the surface. During a light-hearted toast, Mark playfully teased Sarah about going over budget while planning the wedding. "I told you we didn't need that many flowers," he joked, pointing to the lavish arrangements scattered throughout the venue. Sarah laughed it off, brushing it aside with a witty comeback, but some guests noticed the flicker of discomfort in her expression. It was fleeting, almost unnoticeable, but it planted a tiny seed of doubt in the minds of those paying close attention. Later, that evening came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the cutting of the cake. The dessert was nothing short of breathtaking. Standing tall on a pedestal, it was a multi-tiered masterpiece covered in intricate designs of edible gold leaf and fresh flowers. Each layer seemed to tell a story of its own, crafted with precision and care by one of Sarah's closest friends, a talented baker named Lisa. When Sarah and Mark held the knife together and sliced through the first tier, applause erupted from the crowd. They fed each other a small bite, laughing as frosting smeared slightly on their lips. However, things took an unexpected turn when Mark leaned toward Sarah during the festivities. In a voice low enough for only her to hear, he whispered, "You really should have kept better track of expenses. This cake alone must have cost a fortune." His tone was teasing, but there was an edge to it that made Sarah pause. She forced a smile, replying calmly, "We agreed this was worth it, remember? Sometimes you have to spend money to make memories." Though the conversation ended there, it lingered in the air like an invisible cloud. For Sarah, it wasn't just about the cake or the budget. It was the implication that she hadn't been responsible enough. She pushed the thought aside, reminding herself that today was supposed to be perfect. Still, deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As the night wore on, the celebration continued with music, dancing, and heartfelt speeches. Friends shared stories of how Sarah and Mark had met, how their connection had blossomed despite their differences. One speaker even mentioned how inspiring it was to see such a strong partnership between two individuals from different walks of life. The room erupted in cheers, and Sarah clinked her glass, raising it high in gratitude. Yet as the clock struck midnight and guests began to leave, Sarah couldn't ignore the nagging sensation in the pit of her stomach. Something about Mark's earlier comment had unsettled her, though she couldn't put her finger on why. Perhaps it was because she knew Mark tended to let frustration get the better of him sometimes. Or maybe it was the realization that their journey ahead wouldn't always be smooth sailing. Whatever it was, she decided to push the thought away, for now, and focus on the happiness of the day. Little did anyone know, the beautiful cake sitting proudly on the table would soon become a symbol of far more than sweetness. It would mark the beginning of a chapter neither Sarah nor Mark could have predicted, a chapter filled with challenges, heartbreak, and ultimately, transformation. But for now, the newlyweds danced under the stars, blissfully unaware of what lay ahead. Months had passed since the wedding, and the once vivid memories of that magical day began to fade into the background of Sarah and Mark's lives. The honeymoon phase, filled with laughter and late-night conversations, gave way to the harsh realities of everyday life. Bills piled up, dreams felt distant, and stress became a constant companion in their home. Mark's dream of opening his own restaurant, a vision he had shared enthusiastically during their engagement, was proving harder to achieve than either of them had anticipated. He spent countless hours working odd jobs at local eateries, trying to save enough money to make his dream a reality. But no matter how hard he worked, it never seemed like enough. Each setback chipped away at his confidence, leaving him frustrated and overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Sarah juggled multiple clients as an event planner, pouring every ounce of her energy into building her career while also managing their household finances. Despite her efforts, she often found herself stretched thin, both physically and emotionally. One particularly grueling evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings and deadlines, Sarah returned home to find Mark pacing the living room. His face was tense, his jaw clenched tightly as if bracing for battle. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, bills, overdue notices, and bank statements, all glaring reminders of the financial strain they were under. "Sarah," Mark said sharply, his voice cutting through the quietness of the room before she could even take off her shoes. "We need to talk." She froze mid-step, sensing the weight behind his tone. Setting her bag down slowly, she turned to face him, already dreading what was coming next. "What's wrong?" she asked cautiously, though part of her already knew the answer. Mark gestured toward the papers on the table. "This," he exclaimed, his frustration bubbling over. "How did we let things get this bad? These bills are piling up faster than we can pay them off. And don't tell me you didn't know about this. We talked about keeping track of expenses." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples as exhaustion washed over her. She had indeed known about the mounting bills. She had been the one juggling payments and negotiating extensions with creditors, but hearing Mark accuse her of negligence stung deeply. "I've been doing everything I can," she replied, her voice steady but tinged with weariness. "You think I'm not stressed too? Do you have any idea how hard it is to keep all of this together while still making sure we have food on the table?" But Mark wasn't listening. Frustration clouded his judgment, and instead of seeing Sarah's efforts, he fixated on what he perceived as failures. "Maybe if you'd been more careful with the budget, we wouldn't be in this mess," he snapped, his words laced with blame. "You're always spending without thinking, like that ridiculous cake at our wedding. Did you really think that was necessary?" The mention of the cake hit a nerve. It wasn't just about dessert. It represented so much more. Their special day, the joy they had shared, and the sacrifices Sarah had made to ensure everything was perfect. Hearing Mark dismiss it so casually felt like a slap in the face. Her cheeks flushed with anger, and she took a step closer to him. "Are you serious right now?" she shot back, her voice rising. "That cake was important to me because it meant something to us. And guess what? I worked my butt off to afford it, just like I've been working nonstop to support us both. Maybe if you stopped blaming me and started taking responsibility for your own choices, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them crackled like static electricity, heavy and suffocating. Then, without warning, Mark's expression shifted from anger to something darker, something reckless. Before Sarah could react, he stormed into the kitchen, grabbed the leftover anniversary cake they had saved from their first month of marriage, and hurled it directly at her. Time seemed to slow as the cake sailed through the air, frosting and crumbs exploding against Sarah's chest and face. The impact was shocking, not just physically but emotionally. She stood frozen, her wide eyes locked onto Mark's, disbelief etched across her features. The room fell eerily silent except for the sound of her ragged breathing. Frosting dripped down her shirt, sticky and humiliating as tears welled up in her eyes, not out of sadness but out of sheer astonishment. Mark, realizing what he had done, froze as well. His hands trembled slightly, and his face paled as the gravity of his actions sank in. "Sarah," he began, his voice cracking. I didn't mean—" But Sarah didn't give him a chance to finish. With deliberate calmness, she wiped a glob of frosting from her cheek and looked at him, her gaze piercing and unwavering. There was no anger in her expression, only a profound sense of clarity. Without saying another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Mark standing alone amidst the wreckage of their argument. For several minutes, Mark remained rooted to the spot, staring at the smeared remains of the cake on the floor. The absurdity of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. What had he done? How had it come to this? As guilt gnawed at him, he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly reflect on the state of their relationship and the role his own behavior had played in its deterioration. Meanwhile, Sarah retreated to the bathroom, where she cleaned herself up in silence. Her mind raced with thoughts and emotions, each one fighting for dominance. Anger, hurt, disappointment, they all swirled inside her, threatening to overwhelm her completely. Yet beneath it all, there was also a strange sense of resolve. Something inside her had shifted during those moments after the cake hit her. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing truths she had tried to ignore for far too long. By the time she emerged from the bathroom, Sarah knew exactly what she needed to do next. She packed a small bag with essentials, scribbled a brief note explaining that she needed space to think, and quietly slipped out of the house. As she drove away, the cool night air streaming through her car windows, she felt a mix of fear and freedom. Fear because she didn't know what lay ahead, but freedom because, for the first time in months, she felt in control of her own destiny. Unbeknownst to either of them, this single act would set off a chain reaction that would change the course of their lives forever. The days following Sarah's departure felt like an eternity for both her and Mark, though they experienced it in vastly different ways. For Sarah, the initial hours after leaving the house were a blur of conflicting emotions: relief at escaping, the toxic tension that had been building between them, but also uncertainty about what came next. She drove aimlessly for a while, her mind racing with questions she didn't yet have answers to. Could their marriage survive this? Did she even want it to? And most importantly, how had things gotten so bad? Eventually, she found herself pulling up outside her best friend Lisa's apartment. Lisa, who had baked their wedding cake and stood by Sarah through thick and thin, opened the door without hesitation when she saw Sarah standing there, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. Without needing to ask, Lisa ushered her inside, wrapped her in a warm hug, and listened as Sarah recounted everything that had happened. As Sarah spoke, tears streamed down her face, not just from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of clarity that had finally settled over her. "I don't know if I can forgive him," she admitted softly, her voice trembling. "It's not just about the cake. It's everything. The way he talks to me, the blame he puts on me whenever something goes wrong. I feel like I've been carrying all of us for so long, and now I'm just tired." Lisa nodded sympathetically, handing Sarah a cup of tea. "You deserve space to figure out what you need," she said gently. "Don't rush into anything. Just focus on yourself, right now." Those words struck a chord deep within Sarah. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she allowed herself to prioritize her own well-being above everything else. Over the next few weeks, Sarah moved temporarily into Lisa's spare bedroom, using the time to reflect on her life and her relationship with Mark. She began journaling every day, pouring her thoughts onto paper in an effort to untangle the web of emotions swirling inside her. Through writing, she realized just how much she had sacrificed, not just financially but emotionally, for the sake of keeping their household running smoothly. She had taken on far more than her share of responsibility, often biting her tongue during arguments because she feared escalating the conflict further. But now, away from the chaos, she could see clearly how unsustainable that dynamic had become. At work, Sarah threw herself into her projects with renewed determination. Her clients noticed the change immediately. She seemed sharper, more confident, and completely focused. One client, impressed by her dedication, referred her to another high-profile event planning opportunity, which led to several glowing reviews online. Before long, Sarah's business began to flourish in ways she hadn't anticipated. Local magazines featured her in articles about rising stars in the industry, and her social media following grew exponentially. People admired not only her talent, but also her resilience, a quality that shone brighter than ever during this challenging chapter of her life. Meanwhile, back at home, Mark was grappling with his own storm of emotions. The image of Sarah standing in front of him, covered in frosting, haunted him relentlessly. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind, cringing each time at the look of shock and betrayal on her face. Guilt gnawed at him constantly, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. His work suffered, and his dreams of opening a restaurant felt farther away than ever. Desperate to make sense of what had happened, Mark sought advice from his older brother James, whom he had always looked up to. Over coffee one afternoon, Mark confessed everything: the argument, the cake, and the crushing realization that he might have ruined the best thing in his life. James listened patiently, then offered some tough love. "You're blaming everyone but yourself," he said bluntly. "Sarah's not perfect, but neither are you. If you really want to fix this, you've got to start looking inward instead of pointing fingers." Mark knew his brother was right. That night, sitting alone in their empty house, he decided to take action. He reached out to a therapist recommended by James, scheduling his first appointment the following week. At first, attending therapy sessions felt awkward and uncomfortable. Mark struggled to open up, unsure of how to articulate the turmoil inside him. But slowly, with guidance from his therapist, he began to confront the root causes of his behavior: his fear of failure, his tendency to lash out when stressed, and his inability to communicate effectively. Through these sessions, Mark gained valuable insights into himself and his relationship with Sarah. He learned coping mechanisms to manage his frustration and tools to express his feelings constructively rather than explosively. Most importantly, he started taking accountability for his actions, acknowledging that his outburst with the cake was unacceptable and hurtful. Despite his progress, however, Mark knew that understanding his mistakes wasn't enough. He needed to show Sarah that he was genuinely committed to changing, not just for her sake, but for his own. So, he wrote her a heartfelt letter, apologizing sincerely for his behavior and explaining the steps he was taking to improve. He didn't expect forgiveness immediately or at all, but he hoped that sharing his journey would demonstrate his sincerity. When Sarah received the letter, she read it carefully, her heart heavy with mixed emotions. On one hand, she appreciated Mark's effort to acknowledge his wrongdoing and seek help. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the lingering pain and mistrust his actions had caused. She decided to respond, thanking him for reaching out, but emphasizing that rebuilding trust would take time, if it was possible at all. Their brief exchange marked the beginning of a fragile dialogue between them. Mark continued attending therapy and working on himself, determined to prove that he was capable of growth. Sarah, meanwhile, remained focused on her personal and professional development, finding strength and fulfillment in her independence. Both of them knew that their future together was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while they were facing their challenges head-on, with honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to evolve. As weeks turned into months, Sarah began to notice subtle shifts within herself. She no longer defined her worth solely by her role as a wife or provider. Instead, she embraced her identity as a strong, capable woman who deserved respect and partnership in equal measure. Whether or not her path eventually led back to Mark remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: Sarah was no longer afraid to stand firmly in her truth. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's life began to take on a rhythm that felt unfamiliar yet empowering. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing between work and home, constantly trying to balance someone else's needs alongside her own. Instead, she focused entirely on herself, rediscovering who she was outside of her marriage and embracing the freedom that came with it. Her professional life flourished in ways she hadn't anticipated. The high-profile event planning opportunity Lisa had referred her to opened doors Sarah hadn't even known existed. She poured her heart into each project, crafting events that were not only visually stunning, but also deeply meaningful for her clients. Word of her talent spread quickly, and soon she was fielding inquiries from businesses and individuals across the city. Her calendar filled up faster than she could keep track, and her bank account reflected the hard work she was putting in. But it wasn't just her career that transformed. Sarah grew personally as well. She started prioritizing self-care, something she had neglected during the chaos of her marriage. Every morning she woke up early to go for a run in the park near Lisa's apartment, the crisp air invigorating her body and mind. On weekends she explored new hobbies, painting classes, yoga sessions, and cooking workshops that allowed her to reconnect with parts of herself she'd forgotten about. These small joys added color to her days, reminding her that life wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving. Despite her newfound independence, Sarah couldn't completely shut out thoughts of Mark. Their brief exchanges through letters and messages remained polite but distant. While she appreciated his efforts to change, she still struggled to reconcile the man he was now with the man who had thrown cake at her in anger. Trust, she realized, was not something that could be rebuilt overnight, or perhaps ever. One evening, after finishing another successful event, Sarah sat alone in her room scrolling through her phone. She stumbled upon an article about forgiveness and its role in healing relationships. The writer emphasized that forgiveness didn't mean excusing harmful behavior or forgetting what had happened. Rather, it was about releasing the hold that pain had over you, freeing yourself to move forward. As she read those words, Sarah felt a flicker of understanding ignite within her. Maybe forgiving Mark wasn't about letting him off the hook, it was about giving herself permission to heal. Around the same time, Mark continued making strides in his personal journey. Therapy became a cornerstone of his routine, providing him with tools to manage his emotions and communicate more effectively. He began journaling too, inspired by something his therapist suggested. Writing down his thoughts helped him process his feelings without bottling them up until they exploded. Over time, he noticed subtle changes, not just in how he handled stress, but in how he viewed himself and others. Mark also threw himself into his dream of opening a restaurant. With renewed focus and determination, he saved every penny he earned, cutting unnecessary expenses and picking up extra shifts whenever possible. His passion for cooking reignited, and he spent hours experimenting with recipes in his tiny kitchen, dreaming of the day when he could share his creations with the world. Though progress was slow, he reminded himself daily that success wasn't built overnight. Still, no matter how much he accomplished, Mark couldn't escape the ache of missing Sarah. He missed her laugh, her warmth, the way she challenged him to be better. But more than anything, he missed the partnership they once shared, the feeling of being part of a team. In quieter moments, he wondered if they would ever find their way back to each other. Or had his actions shattered that possibility forever? Their paths crossed unexpectedly one afternoon when Sarah attended a local charity gala where Mark was volunteering as part of a culinary showcase. It was a prestigious event aimed at raising funds for underprivileged families, and Sarah had been invited as a guest speaker due to her growing reputation in the community. Dressed elegantly in a sleek navy dress, she took the stage with confidence, delivering a speech that moved the audience to applause. Her words resonated deeply, emphasizing the importance of resilience, hard work, and finding strength in adversity. From the sidelines, Mark watched her intently, pride swelling in his chest despite the distance between them. Seeing her shine so brightly reminded him of why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. After her speech, he approached her cautiously, unsure if she would welcome his presence. When she noticed him walking toward her, her expression softened slightly, though she remained guarded. "Sarah," he said softly, stopping a few feet away. "That was incredible. You're incredible." She gave him a small smile, acknowledging the compliment but keeping her tone neutral. "Thank you, Mark. I've been working hard." "I can see that," he replied earnestly, "and I'm really proud of everything you've accomplished." There was a pause before he added, "I wanted to say thank you for inspiring me to do better." I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll see how much I've changed." Sarah studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his eyes. What she saw surprised her. Not the defensive, angry man she remembered, but someone humbled and genuinely remorseful. Still, she knew better than to rush into any decisions. "Mark," she said finally, choosing her words carefully, "I appreciate your apology, and I see the effort you're putting into changing. But trust is something that has to be earned, not given freely. If we're going to move forward, it has to be step by step, and honestly, I'm not sure if we'll ever get there." Her honesty stung, but Mark nodded, accepting her response without argument. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I respect whatever decision you make. Just know that I'll keep working on myself, whether or not we end up together." The conversation ended there, leaving both of them with plenty to think about. For Sarah, it reinforced the importance of setting boundaries and protecting her emotional well-being. For Mark, it served as motivation to continue growing, not just for Sarah's sake, but for his own. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself reflecting on their interaction. Part of her admired Mark's determination to improve, while another part remained cautious, wary of falling back into old patterns. She realized that moving forward wouldn't be easy, regardless of the path she chose. Reconciliation would require patience, communication, and mutual effort, qualities their relationship had lacked for far too long. But choosing independence meant stepping fully into a future where she stood on her own 2 feet, unafraid of standing alone. As winter approached, bringing with it colder temperatures and shorter days, Sarah and Mark continued navigating their separate journeys. Though uncertainty lingered over their future, one thing was clear. Both of them were committed to becoming the best versions of themselves, whether together or apart. And sometimes, that was enough. The months that followed Sarah and Mark's brief encounter at the charity gala marked a turning point for both of them. Though they remained apart, their lives continued to evolve in ways neither could have predicted. For Sarah, her newfound independence became less of a temporary refuge and more of a permanent foundation upon which she built her life. Meanwhile, Mark's journey toward self-improvement deepened, shaping him into someone who was no longer defined by his past mistakes. Sarah's career reached new heights as word of her exceptional event planning skills spread far beyond her local community. She began receiving requests from clients across the country, some even flying her out for destination weddings and corporate events. Her creativity knew no bounds. Each project was infused with her signature touch, blending elegance with personal meaning. One particular milestone came when she was featured in a national magazine as one of the top 10 event planners to watch. The article highlighted not only her professional achievements but also her resilience and ability to overcome challenges. But success wasn't just about accolades or money for Sarah. It was about rediscovering her identity. She embraced her role as a strong, independent woman who didn't need validation from anyone else. Her weekends were filled with activities that brought her joy, volunteering at a local shelter, attending art exhibits, and hosting dinner parties with friends, where laughter echoed late into the night. These moments reminded her how rich life could be when lived authentically. Still, despite her happiness, thoughts of Mark occasionally surfaced. Their interaction at the gala lingered in her mind, not because she missed him, but because it represented a chapter she had yet to fully close. Was reconciliation possible? Or had their paths diverged too far to ever reconnect? Sarah wrestled with these questions privately, knowing there was no easy answer. For Mark, progress came slowly but steadily. Therapy remained a cornerstone of his growth, helping him unpack years of unresolved emotions and insecurities. He learned to take responsibility for his actions without deflecting blame onto others, a skill that proved invaluable not only in his personal life but also in his professional pursuits. His dream of opening a restaurant finally gained traction when he secured a small loan and found an affordable space downtown. With sweat and determination, He transformed the empty shell into a cozy eatery named Roots, symbolizing his commitment to starting fresh. Opening night at Roots was bittersweet for Mark. Friends, family, and former colleagues gathered to celebrate the culmination of his hard work. As he stood behind the counter greeting guests, pride swelled within him. But so did longing. He couldn't help but wonder if Sarah would have been proud of him too. That thought stayed with him long after the evening ended, fueling his resolve to keep pushing forward. Despite their separate journeys, fate seemed determined to bring Sarah and Mark back into each other's orbit. Months later, Sarah received an invitation to speak at another high-profile event, a culinary festival aimed at showcasing innovative chefs and industry leaders. To her surprise, Mark's restaurant was listed among the participants. Part of her considered declining the invitation, fearing the awkwardness of seeing him again. But deep down, she knew avoiding him wouldn't solve anything. If anything, facing him might provide the closure she needed. On the day of the festival, Sarah arrived early, dressed in a chic yet understated outfit that radiated confidence. As she prepared for her panel discussion, she spotted Mark setting up his booth nearby. His focus was intense as he arranged samples of his dishes, oblivious to her presence. When he finally looked up and saw her, his expression softened, though nervousness flickered in his eyes. "Hey," he said simply, approaching her hesitantly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure I would either," Sarah admitted with a small smile. "But here we are." They exchanged pleasantries, briefly before Mark excused himself to return to his booth. Throughout the day, their interactions were polite but distant, an unspoken acknowledgement of the chasm that still existed between them. Yet there were moments when their eyes met across the crowded venue, lingering just long enough to convey a shared history neither could erase. Later that evening, after the festivities wound down, Sarah found herself lingering near Mark's booth. He noticed her hesitation and gestured for her to join him. Sitting together under the soft glow of string lights, they talked openly for the first time in months. Mark shared updates about his restaurant, expressing gratitude for the second chance life had given him. Sarah listened intently, offering encouragement while maintaining a careful emotional distance. When the conversation shifted to their relationship, Mark spoke candidly. "I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "And I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know that I'm committed to being better, not just for you, but for myself. If there's any way I can make amends, I'll do it." Sarah studied him carefully, weighing his words against the man she once loved and the person he had become. After a long pause, she replied, "Mark, I see the effort you're putting in, and I respect that. But trust isn't something I can give back easily. It has to be earned over time, and honestly, I'm not sure if we'll ever get there." Her honesty stung, but Mark nodded, accepting her response without argument. "I understand," he said quietly. "Whatever happens next, I hope you find happiness. You deserve nothing less." As they parted ways that night, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. While the future remained uncertain, she realized she no longer carried the weight of resentment she once had. Whether or not she and Mark reconciled, she was confident in her ability to navigate whatever lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, Sarah returned to her busy schedule, throwing herself into work and personal passions with renewed vigor. Mark, too, continued building his restaurant, pouring his heart into every dish he served. Though their paths may never cross again in the same way, both emerged stronger from the trials they had faced, ready to embrace whatever the future held, whether together or apart. And perhaps that was the most beautiful part of their story. Not the ending itself, but the transformation they underwent along the way. For Sarah, it was about reclaiming her power and finding joy in independence. For Mark, it was about learning accountability and discovering the strength to rebuild. Together or separately, they proved that even in the face of heartbreak, growth is always possible.